Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to be talking about various aspects of NFV and really getting down into some of the real issues that we've found in labs, in various proof of concepts that we've done around in operators across the world. So we know that in today's, let's call it thick CPE or traditional or classical or legacy network element or router, you'll find a bunch of embedded network functions. We call them PNFs today, physical network functions, but we used to just say, you know, it's a product that did various things with embedded functionality inside it. And this product was managed using a typical OSS, BSS, yeah? And certain functions would still reside in the data center, but particularly aggregation type functions. The classic example is VPN. If you needed an encrypted tunnel, you'd encrypt down at the layer 3 CPE, and you'd aggregate at the data center. And this has been the traditional model, and frankly, this is what most of the industry is still selling today. Virtualization is exciting. It's a revolution, as the previous speaker was talking about, but we haven't really got to active deployment apart from one or two initial trials around the world. And there's actually a plethora of choices in terms of taking those network functions, virtualizing them, and then deploying them into various parts of the network. And these choices can be, what platform do I use? They can be, where do I locate the functions? Okay? They can also be about what type of control protocols you use. Should it be OpenFlow, often associated with SDN? Should it be NetConf, often associated with NFV? We talk about the CPE. What should we do with the CPE? If we have an installed base of traditional routers or CPE, what do we do with them? Do we virtualize everything? And if we do virtualize, do we put them in the data center? Or do we put them on a white box? So many, many different types of choices that are confronting us. But what we see is when you look at what's available inside the industry, there are a number of challenges that operators are faced with. They're looking for many of the things that you see here on the left of this chart. Yeah? Carrier grade. By carrier grade, I don't just mean 5 nines of reliability. I mean the ability to integrate efficiently into their systems, the ability to control TCO, to onboard services, yeah, and to provision end-to-end. It's also about the migration path. We've been talking about greenfield versus brownfield in some of the earlier presentations at this conference. And that's absolutely critical because you can't just change everything at one go. You need to have that path to migration. A key thing that we're finding in many of our discussions with operators is the need for licensing flexibility. Traditionally, appliances or software has been licensed using a key management system. But in this virtualized world where you're moving VNS between one data center and another, between one server and another, potentially moving them from a white box environment into a data center environment, that just doesn't work anymore. So you need a different licensing scheme to be able to deal with that. Openness and interoperability, that was one of the key discussions on the panel on the first day. Yeah? What does that actually mean? What are the different flavors of that? But clearly, it is a challenge for the industry making sure that that actually happens. And the standards are often lagging the requirements of the CSPs. There's resource issues that need to be done. There's scalability issues. And of course, the big unknown, what is the return on investment when one moves to virtualization? Is it just cost reduction? Is it service agility? Can we reduce CapEx? Most people think not nowadays. They are focusing on the service agility and service flexibility they can get from virtualization. But when they look at the vendor landscape and what is available, they find in many instances these attributes that they're looking on the left are not forthcoming. So the operators have discussions, many, many discussions internally, often with their vendors, about what is the way to NFV. And here I've shown you one of the discussions that you can find in Alice in Wonderland. I don't want to suggest that going to NFV is at all like what Alice found in Wonderland, but I would suggest that you need to know or set yourself some specific goals to understand how to get there. What is your journey, and what are the steps that you need to take in order to ensure that that happens efficiently. Now, what we're seeing is that the industry is crystallizing onto three different types of deployment models. There is the so-called thick CPE, resides on the customer premises, where most of the functions are located. This is the so-called white box CPE, x86 infrastructure, typically with an OpenStack KVM environment, onto which you load the many VNFs that are required at the customer premises, often associated with large enterprise type deployments. If one takes a look on the right of this diagram, you'll see the so-called thin CPE, where here most of the functions are actually moved into the data center. A minimal subset of functions reside on the CPE. Some are still required for resiliency, for service assurance, customer experience, those types of things. But most of the primary functions are moved into the data center. And those are the two types of models that we're seeing when we talk about pure virtualization. But I talked about that word migration. A lot of operators have issues with what do they do with the installed base? What do they do with all that kit that's still out there in the market, inside their customer base? And here, one of the ways of solving this is to make sure that that kit can be equipped with a netconf interface. So it can be integrated into the next generation OSS, still play a part, and therefore the kit has a life that continues and allows this migration path to be achieved. So these are the three different types of scenarios that we're seeing, looking at the access platforms that could be made available to customers. And then, of course, all of that orchestrated using the Mano. So in terms of achieving this migration, there are a number of elements that need to be considered. As I was talking about, how do you manage the installed base? And my suggestion is, in fact, there are a couple of strategies that can be employed here. One is to mandate that your orchestrator speaks both CLI and netconf. Another is to mandate that the equipment that you choose or you put into your network today, remembering that you're still putting classical or traditional equipment into the network, can speak netconf. Most operators, with almost no exceptions, have now looked at netconf as the way to provision network functions. There's very little debate about that, although there are one or two minor exceptions out there. As I said, look for parallel support of CLI and netconf, both from your orchestrator, but potentially also from the access platforms that you're putting into the field. And one thing that can actually make a critical difference is to look at the association of the Yang objects and the CLI commands, because if you have joint CLI and netconf support, if there's a mapping between those Yang objects inside the access platform and the CLI commands, this really greatly assists in the operational transition of service definitions that you've been using for many years. But the chaos really begins with testing, and I use that word quite explicitly. We've gone into so many labs around the world, and I think partly as a result that there being so many moving parts, the orchestration system, the Mano, the Vim, the different access platforms, the different protocols that are being used, the different VNFs, the resource consumptions of those VNFs, that it's very difficult to control so many moving parts. And so what I'd like to suggest is that you, when you work with vendors such as ourselves, that you agree a test plan. Frankly, we've got into a lot of labs when the people, normally very skilled people, who understand how to test products are so challenged by the too many different moving parts, that they ignore the test plan. It's like, come on in, let's see what you've got. Oh, you've got a great white box. Can I throw somebody else's VNF on it? Yes, all of these things can be done, but let's do it in a controlled and sequential fashion. So one thing to do is to target, at least for the vendor, a familiar environment. Let them suggest what the NFVI is. Let them suggest what the virtual infrastructure manager is. Let them suggest the VNF management piece, yeah? So that at least you can see whether the specific function that you're testing or the specific environment that you're testing actually works. Then add, sequentially, more unknowns. Often we find that the orchestration entity has not yet been chosen. So one thing that we often do is to actually go into a lab with a netconf client, which allows the access platforms to be configured to show that that works. And then as the orchestration piece is then chosen or selected, we can move on to that. As I said, it's absolutely critical. When I first came into the network industry, I used to work for a protocol conformance test house. And this idea of having a known test system and then introducing unknowns one by one was absolutely critical to achieving success of testing. Nothing has changed in the 25-odd years since I've been in the industry. You still need to do that. So target the test environment, target the piece that you're going to test, and then start to add the additional components. Maybe add a target orchestrator. Maybe test with 2 or 3 as you move on. If you want to test service chaining, ask the vendor to show service training of their own VNFs first to make sure that that works. Then introduce the third-party VNF to see if that can be accomplished. Look at how the orchestrator can lifecycle the different VNFs. Yeah? There may be some VNF management components that are missing. There may be descriptors that are missing that don't allow that to actually happen. But because you've then isolated that as a discrete step, then it actually facilitates the testing process. Yeah? And then, of course, test in different NFVI environments. Yeah? I think none of this is rocket science, but I think we are so challenged in many of these labs and POCs and trials that are taking place around the industry today that often it's very difficult to see the wood for the trees. Another critical element is because precisely there are so many moving parts, yeah, it's good to have the experts on hand, either directly in the lab, yeah, if you've got multiple vendors that you're testing, or to make sure at least that they're remotely available so that when problems occur, and they will occur, yeah, that they can quickly isolate what those issues are, they can make suggestions as to how to change the environment to overcome them, or if they need to go back to the code to solve problems. One of the problems that we found in one environment was we'd used the same names for our Yang objects as another vendor. Yeah? That led to some name collisions. We were able to quickly repair that. But those types of issues do occur. And if the experts are not there, if you've just got the person who's quite remote from the source code, yeah, in the lab, they may not be able to quickly identify what that issue is and to move forward. And that includes the experts from the operator or the carrier themselves. Yeah? Make sure that those people that really understand what's going on are actually present. So in terms of a checklist, these are some of the things that we work with our customers to understand, to show them what's available. Yeah? So do go down the netconf Yang route. It's pretty much what everybody is using, certainly in the NFV environment. Do look for netconf plus CLI as a management target for, in particular, the orchestrators that you're using. Look for the same in the equipment. Yeah? And look for the equivalence of the Yang objects and the CLI commands that are available on that equipment. One thing that we're seeing is that there's a lot of focus initially on the network functions available on the customer premises. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the scalability issues are yet to be solved in many data centers. Yeah? There are so many moving parts there in terms of the NFVI, the VIM, the orchestration, how the parts talk to each other, that is an issue that I think still needs to be solved. So don't over-centralize too quickly would be one of our suggestions to the industry. Another critical issue that we're seeing is this issue of compact code. A lot of people have made network appliances They've put their network functions onto those network appliances, and the appliances have always been dimensioned, yeah, to support the specific network function. But the issue here is if you want to scale, yeah, those functions can be extremely heavy. So compact code and asking your vendors to work on that as a specific issue is, again, a strong recommendation that we make. I've talked about sequential testing, yeah? And of course, be open. There are some proprietary systems out there, yeah, from many of the vendors in the industry, including some of the startup vendors that are, some of whom are actually here on the floor today. Yeah? If you genuinely want openness, if you genuinely want to achieve a multi-vendor environment, don't lock yourself up with a proprietary system. And then be pragmatic. It's going to go wrong. I'm sorry, it always goes wrong. There are issues to be solved. As I said, make sure that the experts are on hand. Plan those steps. Take baby steps, if you like, forward in order to achieve a realistic result. Perfection will not be achievable in the short term, and probably never. So that concludes my presentation. If you'd like to learn more about this, I have a white paper on our stand, which is on booth 10, which really goes into a lot of detail about some of the issues that I've highlighted here in this presentation. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.